Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, good to see you today.
Good to see you, Dr. Paul.
Good. There was an interesting meeting on Monday. The President of France and the President of Iran got together, and they talked about something very positive from my viewpoint. They talked about trade as a consequence of this recent agreement, which a lot of American politicians aren't too enthusiastic about. We don't hear a great deal of discussion in the presidential debates, and there's a pretty large consensus with the establishment that they don't particularly like this, although the president has gone along and trying to break the ice with the Iranians. But I found this pretty fascinating, and I think it has significance. And the motivations, of course, the agreement that was devised between a group of countries in the United Nations that got together, and they took off the UN sanctions, which is very, very good. But it also has a big commercial interest, which is always the significance of trade. Free trade, I think, reduces the chances of animosities. But this one was sort of a headline as a battle or a contest between Boeing and Airbus. It's a big order, and now that Iran's coming into the real world and they're going to sell oil and have some money, it was very competitive. But it looks like right now it may be that France has gained the upper hand from the negotiations they just had, and this may lead to good things.
Yeah, and how many jobs were lost in Seattle for Boeing, you know, if this deal does go through. But it highlights, I think, one important thing, which is that there are two sets of sanctions on Iran. There's the international sanctions through the UN, which the P5+1 talks made the agreement on, and those sanctions are set to expire early next year, opening the door for international trade with Iran. But there's another set of sanctions partially imposed by the President of the U.S., and the majority of the bulk of them being imposed by Congress through legislation. That is going to be much more tricky to unravel, especially when you have a Congress that is very, very ambivalent, to say the least, about opening the door to Iran.
Yeah, and there probably is not a whole lot of difference. The one with the biggest megaphone right now is Donald Trump, and he certainly isn't arguing the case that we should be working more closely with the Iranians, and I doubt very much if Hillary Clinton is much into free trade. So I think that's going to be around a bit, and it's only going to be after we're hurt a bit where we might wake up on this. But I see this as positive because we're moving away from the confrontation, and we're moving toward trade. Even though we're not involved, we're really the isolationists here. We want to isolate the Iranians, which we have done, and this has always been a misconception. And the accusations, of course, toward myself and others who believed in free trade, we were always called, you know, the isolationists. We didn't want to do this because we didn't want to go and put troops in other countries. But the people who advocate sanctions are the isolationists, and they're maintaining it, and they're anti-free trade. I mean, just think how they react to even, you know, opening up trade with Cuba. And of course, this arrangement with Iran, there's been a lot of resistance to it. So I see that the momentum is moving in the right direction. This doesn't only involve the big airline, you know, the manufacturing, because they're talking about industrial products and cars and agriculture products. So this could be a big deal. But I think part of the reason this is happening is that the Europeans seem to be a little schizophrenic on this, because the Europeans go along with NATO and the aggressiveness, and, you know, we have to attack Russia and do all these things, versus the people who want to have trade. But here they're dealing with a country that's friendly with Russia, and China is also involved. They don't, and even maybe Japan will want to participate in this trade with Iran. So since trade, from my viewpoint and from the viewpoint of the market, is always very good, and to dissipate some of these confrontations, I'm hoping one thing, that this is a sign that NATO, the militancy of NATO, may have been challenged directly now by the benefits of free trade.
You wonder if the American business is so far in bed with government that it won't speak out in its own best interests. But, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty, and this is underscored by France has been in touch with Washington, asking them to guarantee that French companies won't suffer from Washington's additional sanctions if they start doing business with Iran. So there's uncertainty. The other thing they're concerned about is if they do strike up some business deals, which tend to be long-term projects, what happens if the U.S. down the road reimposes sanctions? Will then French companies be on the hook for them or be punished for them? So it's difficult also to do business, and I wonder if that creates some resentment among the Europeans and others.
Well, it is, but it also says that the United States is still a pretty powerful country, economically and militarily, and they're moving cautiously. But also, unwritten and in between the lines, you might say, well, the empire is weakening, as time goes on. I don't think the Europeans are going to back down. Maybe there will come to a point where the Europeans aren't going to worry about that, about U.S. sanctions versus UN sanctions, and they could back off. So this might be a sign that if the Europeans don't, succumb to what we tell them to do and move in a direction, I could see the trade in this area and a different approach to Russia would be to their benefit. And this is a wild supposition, but conceivably, in spite of the welfare state in Europe, what if trade built up in Europe and we continued our empire that nobody wants and people are tired of, and the American people get tired of fighting these wars? The empire might have to close down a bit, which means that economically it's conceivable it could give a boost to Europe. And theoretically, you might even propose the idea that I wonder if this could make for a different realignment with the currencies. Right now, the dollar is sky high, and who wants to invest in euros? But something like this could change the whole thing, and it could have an economic benefit. So your suggestion is, why don't the American people and American business people wake up and protect themselves? And why don't we have a nation that once again has more confidence in free markets and look at our history and talk about free markets and get rid of the militarism? So this might be seen as an insignificant event and just another step in one direction, but it could turn out to be a major event.
Well, if you have the rest of the world trading goods that the Iranians really want back and forth, and the U.S. is frozen out, it's going to have an economic impact on the U.S. What I worry about, because we watched the debates, we saw everyone talking about spending $1 trillion more on military stuff. So if the U.S. takes the heat in the private sector, if they start just pumping out money to create more military things that we don't need, that just drain the economy and just spend us into oblivion.
Then that raises the question, how long can they do that? Because if we don't have a healthy economy, then and the warmongers admit this. This is why we have to do whatever we can to tax and raise this money, because you can't have free markets if you don't have a strong military, and they can't have it both ways. So yes, this could lead to the point where the hawks might not have access to it. Right now, the world's going to loan us some money, and we're going to keep building up the weapons and keep fussing. But now this is a contest between the United States and Europe. And I think this is very significant, and I'm hoping some good things can come from this, because traditionally the world is much better off. But this whole idea of people who believe in free trade as being isolationists and the people who want sanctions and demanding other nations follow our rules, and you can't sell this to Iran or we're going to punish you, and that's a terrible type of trade war.
Yeah, we heard isolationists thrown around the other night at the debates too. So.
Oh yeah, that's usual. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and like I said, I think this is a very important event going on. These negotiations with Hollande and Rouhani dealing with more particularly whether the Airbus will be bought or Boeing, and right now it looks like the Airbus is going to be bought, and it looks like our trade policy makers are making things hard for ourselves. And right now, so far in the election, we don't hear anybody talking about, treating Iran differently. But I think Iran is truly interested in letting people come in and give up this whole desire about having nuclear weapons, and none of this scaremongering talk, but oh no, this is a trick because pretty soon they're going to launch nuclear weapons around the world. That is just crazy talk. But I think right now, though, we're moving in a good direction. I think this is representing a challenge between the NATO people who want to have military confrontation with Russia and around the Middle East, and versus those in Europe who are waking up and wanting to trade, where that has not happened in this country yet. So hopefully the world will wake up. I think it's a sad story that more of this didn't occur. It occurred to a degree that was after the Soviet system collapsed, and there was a lot more communication. But all of a sudden, a couple of years ago, out of the clear blue, we jump up and decide, well, we got to get rid of all of these governments, and we got to confront Russia, and we'll never talk to Iranians, but you know, we're talking to the Cubans now. So let's hope this is a step in the right direction, because certainly free trade is a good way to spread the message of American greatness, because then they can voluntarily decide whether or not they would like to emulate us, and that would be a much better than us trying to spread our so-called goodness around the world at the point of a gun. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.